Welcome back to Myrtle's Rant. Today I'm actually going to play for you a pre-recorded conversation. Paul-Michael Keichel and myself were invited by SANPUD, which is the South African network of people who use drugs, who are also an affiliate organization of Fields of Green, to give a few presentations to their field workers who are learning all about drugs and the law at the moment. And it's been a particularly interesting series of webinars. Charles has sat in on some of them, Paul-Michael and myself. There's breakaway sessions within the Zoom. It's really amazing how everybody can get together, 30 people in a room, and have online and have a really, really constructive time. The field workers are incredibly engaged because they are the network of people who use drugs, so they are completely connected to the issue. So this week, both Paul-Michael and myself were rather busy. So SANPUD had another presentation coming up. So what we decided to do, because PM was in Johannesburg at the time and was visiting us here at the Jazz Farm, we decided to sit down and film a casual conversation between the two of us on a very serious subject. The brief that we were given by SANPUD was all about thresholds. Now, in the cannabis community, we call this plant counting. And one of the things on my list for Myrtle's Rant was this plant counting issue, because, it's very, very close to our hearts, very close to the hearts of the whole of the legacy cannabis industry. And I don't think that this issue has been addressed enough worldwide. Germany has just said some ridiculous amount of plants, like 2 plants per person. And of course, nothing about the bottles of whiskey. So Paul-Michael came to visit us here at the Jazz Farm, and we filmed this conversation, which we are now sending out to you. Thank you very much to SANPUD for giving us permission. And we're also giving a shout out to our brothers and sisters at SANPUD and the amazing, amazing work that they do. It really is, it's incredibly difficult, the conditions that people work under and the issues that they have to deal with. So we really do salute the brave people of SANPUD. So I hope you enjoy this conversation between myself, Paul-Michael Keichel, the head of Fields of Green for All's legal team. Hello to all of our SANPUD colleagues and welcome to the Hotbox studio. I'm very pleased today, by a stroke of luck, to have Paul-Michael Keichel here with me. My name is, of course, Myrtle Clark from Fields of Green for All. Paul-Michael is from Cullen & Associates and the head of our legal team here at Fields of Green for All. So unfortunately, we couldn't be with you in person on the Zoom session, but we decided that we'll record a little something, seeing as we are right here at the Hotbox show here at the Jazz Farm. And what we're going to do today in the broader topic of drug decriminalization, we're going to speak about this very, very wide, intricate topic called thresholds and amounts. And now this is, of course, one of our 10 crisis points. In my last presentation, I went through those 10 crisis points, and you can, of course, find them at fieldsofgreenforall.org.za, and you can just search 10 crisis points on our blog page, and it outlines what those points are. Now, this whole issue in our world is about plant counting. How much dacha you are allowed to have on you, how much you're allowed to grow, how much you're allowed to be storing. Obviously, for now, it's only storing in your private space. But then this also stretches out to how much do you consume it personally, and so on. So that's our topic for today. And thank you so much to Angela and Klaus and everybody at SANPUD for bringing up this incredibly important issue. It's actually an international issue as we see cannabis regulations being perpetrated all around the world, in Europe, of course, in the Americas. This issue of thresholds and plant counting is certainly a very, very topical one. So without any further ado, as they always say on a YouTube video, let's kick this off with, what does plant counting mean for you, PM?
Thanks, Myrtles. Well, firstly, we're not coming to you in a vacuum. We ourselves, I might be a lawyer and you might be an activist, but we, like you, are people who use drugs. some of them legal, some of them illegal, and plant counting and thresholds. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that cannabis is this first toe in the water. You've been saying it for years that cannabis is the gateway drug to reasonable and rational drug reform, or reasonable and rational drug law. And now all of a sudden we're in this weird situation where in 2018 the Constitutional Court says to our Parliament that it's unconstitutional to prevent people from using and cultivating cannabis in their private spaces, and for, personally, so obviously not selling this cannabis. But the Constitutional Court didn't impose this concept of limiting the number of plants or the weight of cannabis that anybody has in their possession. And this is something that Parliament has decided unilaterally is something that they're going to do. And it's something that, as a lawyer, I say is open to constitutional challenge, because we've always proceeded by way of analogy. One of the primary things that we did when we started fighting the trial of the plants is to say, we just want to be treated as poorly as tobacco and alcohol users. And Myrtles, we've been saying this for ages, but nobody comes and kicks down your door or arrives purportedly in terms of some act of parliament and counts the number of bottles of wine or the number of bottles of whiskey, or for that matter, the number of cartons of cigarettes that you have in your home. And we're going to say that that's arbitrary and irrational, because ultimately, just because these are legal drugs that have been endorsed by Western society for a number of decades or a number of centuries, doesn't change the fact that they are drugs, and that these are per se harmful drugs that Parliament apparently doesn't think that it needs to set a threshold on. So why is it that all of a sudden the lawmakers and the enforcers of the law think that it's okay to come onto your personal private property and start telling you that if you've got more than a certain number of plants, you are now a criminal in terms of some act of Parliament? It's, in my view, it's not only madness, hypocritical, but it's fundamentally unconstitutional.
I think, and I've said this so many times, that I think it's got to do with laziness and it's got to do with ignorance. So the laziness certainly refers to doing your research properly and not just cutting and pasting the law from somewhere else. So we've seen in the news lately that Germany are now going to restrict the Germans to 2 plants. So I'm not sure exactly what you would do with 2 plants. Myself as a heavy cannabis user, what I would do with 2 plants. Also, I think Canada has a restriction of 4 plants. Switzerland, which was one of the first private home grow countries, is I think 6 or 8 plants. And the latest iteration of the Cannabis for Private Purposes Bill, I think, was 15 plants. But 8 to 15 years in jail if you had more plants than that. And my question is always, and this was my question very, very bluntly and very, very openly in the last, do you remember?
Yeah.
In the last time we presented to Parliament for the Private Purposes Bill, and I said to them, who is going to come and count my plants? Who is going to do that? Can you imagine over 70 murders a day now in South Africa, and they're going to send the police around counting people's dacha plants? Are they going to go to the very, very remote communities in, say, Pondoland, where you have to park your car and you have to walk through a river and then 3 hours through the mountains to go and find the fields? And then are you going to go and go 1, 2, 3, 4? Or are you going to say, no, it's too much, and you're going to spray them all with glyphosate, Or are you going to go to the Northern Cape? Are you going to go row across the Orange River in your little boat to go to the islands to go and bust the rusters for growing too many plants? So it's just not rational. It really isn't, and that's why I say that that parliamentary committee are lazy because of the cut and paste, and I say that they are ignorant because we have the scale of harms from Professor David Nutt. That is something that I would really urge the participants to look up. You can just search scale of harms on our website and you'll find lots of information about that. You'll find the diagram. Of course, in our, which way can I go here on the camera? In our manifesto, there's the scale of harms diagram from Professor David Nutt et al., who came, this is old research now, with What's the most dangerous drug? Alcohol is at the top, all the way down to psilocybin mushrooms at the bottom. And we need regulations according to harm. But of course, as you know, the harms have never been ventilated in court, so...
No, they haven't been. I mean, I suppose to a limited degree they were, because the Constitutional Court, our Constitutional Court in 2018, seemed to recognise, I mean, it doesn't seem to have filtered down in the judgment, but we were certainly there when this was being argued. And you'll recall that Justice Cameron threw up his hands at one stage, I think to Reg Willis, Advocate Reg Willis, and said, but come on, we all know that this isn't as harmful as tobacco and alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, do we even need to debate this issue? Which then, you know, going back to the scale of harms, it seems to be almost trite at this point. You know, do we really need to prove that this is less harmful than tobacco and alcohol? And the fact is that we actually don't, because the onus of proof, as it turns out, in terms of our constitution, not the German constitution, not the Canadian constitution, which is why I say that we cannot use them as examples, because we are a unique liberal democracy with its own constitution and its own laws. What it says is that if an act of parliament, a law of general application, is going to purport to limit the rights that are promised to us in terms of the Bill of Rights, which the Constitutional Court has already said to us includes the right to personally use and cultivate cannabis in a private space, then it needs to do so mindful of things, and this is section 36 of our Constitution, such as a rational connection between the limitation and what it's trying to achieve.
Exactly.
Now, but that's the point. So how is it that all of a sudden, arbitrarily, you were once on 8 adult plants, but now, because people have kicked and screamed, you're on 15? So is Parliament really going to, with a straight face, or our lawmakers, going to go a second round in the Constitutional Court and say, well, actually, we had some sort of science that showed that 8 plants actually wasn't that harmful for an individual, but we have a rational basis for now limiting you to 15 plants. All of a sudden, we've scientifically and rationally determined that this is harmful for an individual. So I think it's very, very clear that they're not going to be able to prove that. And therefore, all of this concept of plant counting is per se unconstitutional. And for that matter, and it's a point, you know, sometimes I feel like a broken record, but the Constitutional Court didn't say that it didn't refer only or exclusively to personal consumption. It said personal use. Now, if I'm growing cannabis for cattle fodder, and this is my private herd of cattle, and I'm not going on to sell those cattle, I mean, per se, that's personal private use. Similarly, if I want to surround my 20-hectare farm with a hedge of cannabis, why am I not allowed to do that? The Constitutional Court said that I have the right to do that. So, you know, it just begs this question, you know, who is making these decisions? Which prohibitionist in Parliament is influencing all of these people that the answer keeps being no? We're only going to let you go so far because we've arbitrarily decided that beyond that point you're doing too much harm to yourself and you're doing too much harm to society. When they're unable to prove it. We know that they're unable to prove it.
They're totally unable to prove it, and we get these big contradictions in this parliamentary hearings, you know. I hope that nobody who's watching this today has to sit through those incredibly painful, it takes us days, we have PTSD, and just the fact that we can almost laugh about what it is like speaking to Parliament. I think that webinars like this are incredibly important, don't you? I mean, they're really so that the steps for ultimately our ultimate goal of harm reduction and complete decriminalization doesn't have to go through these painful steps in getting there. What the future holds, we certainly don't know. But I know I've just come back from Nigeria, and the conference, it was the 14th biennial conference on research and information about substance abuse. Big long thing, and a whole lot of it was about harm reduction, and I think that is maybe what Parliament are trying to do. They're trying to reduce the harms, but they don't know what the harms are.
And they forget the harms of dragging you through the criminal justice system. They forget that you're supposed to put that on the scales.
Yeah, no, they do, because what's that? Oh, that's just the cannabis people, you know, who actually have to pay for it. set aside the time, give up our jobs, all of that thing, raise the money for the legal team, because the legal team also have to pay the rent and feed the family.
Turns out,
you know,
yeah.
I mean, one can't expect ad nauseum. We've been doing this for 12 years for our legal team to now like work pro bono again. You know, it's just that's how it is. But the one incident that really hit me in Nigeria was we were speaking about this exact thing. And what is harm reduction? You first have to establish the harms, and then you try and reduce those harms. So say you have needle and syringe exchange programs, or you have opioid substitute therapy. And the one woman stood up, and she was obviously very religious, which is a problem from the beginning. So she was coming from this moral point of view. She says, well, this sounds to me as a service provider of people who are having problems with substance abuse, is that you are rewarding their bad behavior. So I think that what cannabis can show for the much more complicated issue, or the broader drug issue, and there will be no drug apartheid, cannabis can show these incremental steps that need to be taken for the world to actually understand what harm reduction is.
Yeah.
Because obviously a lot of people don't get it.
And if this does reduce harm, why is it not being done with tobacco and alcohol? You know, it begs a big question. I mean, yes, I mean, it is a prerogative to ban these things or to limit these things, but you know, I think the argument has always been, if you're not going to limit those things, then you can't legitimately purport to limit others.
Yeah.
And you know that I'm involved now in fighting for the legalization of psilocybin, and ultimately my end goal is to pretty much decriminalize or legalize all of the low harm entheogens.
Yeah.
Are we going to face this time and time again? You know, are we going to get this right with cannabis and have, you know, use the lessons and not make the same mistakes again with cannabis? Or as the dominoes fall and each of these entheogens are legalized, which I think is inevitable. Unfortunately, we seem to piggyback off foreign jurisdictions, but each time, are we going to have this fight? Are they going to now say, okay, you know, you can have 12 dried psilocybin mushrooms in your presence, but as soon as you've got 13, now you're going to go to prison for a number of years. You know, when does this madness stop, and when does our thinking actually shift meaningfully so that we're actually looking at the fact that there is no war on drugs, there's this war on drug users, and actually by implementing and enforcing this war on drugs, we're actually ruining lives. We're harming nobody. As you correctly said, needle exchange programs, social upliftment, helping those in need, creating an environment where people don't fall on drugs as their only comfort in the world. These are things that truly help people. When it was that somebody decided that we are actually helping individuals by putting them into prison and pulling them out of schools and losing them their jobs, I don't know. But to me, it's certainly, it can be classed as madness.
Yes, because as that woman said, and I've never heard it said so plainly, you're rewarding their drug use, you know? So I think that there was, I remember you telling us really, really early in our campaign, there will be a certain percentage, maybe 10% of people, that you will never change their minds. But you've got those other 90%, that of those, there might be 50% of them that still need some convincing. We definitely will definitely get there. But you know, as Ethan Nadelman, who some of you may know, he was at Drug Policy Week in 2017 as one of the keynote speakers. He's just been with me in Nigeria, and they did a whole panel on tobacco law reform. And he said that the way that countries are cutting down on vaping, on vape pens, when it's a nicotine delivery method that is less harmful than the combustion of the plant, you know? And he said, please, please, please let the whole tobacco issue not become Prohibition 2.0.
Yeah.
Because, and we're seeing it here in South Africa as well, they've kicked back against vape pens. And the children, and then what about the children, and what about the children? Now, I actually voice recorded his speech about what about the children. He said they will always revert to that when it comes to harm reduction measures. And you should be much happier that the kids are vaping at 15 and not smoking cigarettes at 15. And then he said that they have the scientific evidence to show that if you are 30 years or under now, today, in this world, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you are 90% less likely to die from tobacco-related illness than everybody who's over 30. Because in the short amount of time with vaping, we've managed to introduce these harm reduction measures, whether they've been accepted by the government or not. I found that very interesting to say we have actually, I mean, how long has vaping been going? Maybe 6 years or so, 6 years or so, since you could buy a little twist, whatever.
Yeah.
So
I don't know, temporal distortion. I've been stoned the whole time.
exactly. Cannabis is totally illegal in Nigeria, so I could only take my THC vape pen, and it was certainly really helpful, and I've come back with a much better tolerance level, so that little tolerance break, you see, so I can take my tolerance break. I did not, it hardly even crossed my mind when I was in Nigeria that I could really do with the spliff. Or I'm not going to sleep if I don't have my cannabis.
You're probably too busy?
Yeah, too busy, distracted, fine. I wasn't thinking. But on the 9-hour flight back, geez, did I ever want a cigarette?
Yeah,
and they confiscated my twist little vape pen at the airport. So I didn't even have my anti-stress harm reduction
because
thing
of the battery, probably. Because of the battery.
Because of the battery, and I should have just put it in my check-in luggage, and I didn't think so. Anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that we've just about covered everything that we need to do today, and Charles is of course on hand to answer any of your questions. And remember that this is the cannabis in South Africa, the people's plant, is available it's a 6 meg download for free from our website. And look at that scale of harms, because I think that it's very important when it comes to this issue of thresholds. And then also do yourself a favor and go back and read the cannabis judgment from September 2018. Very important, that language. Like you said, use. It didn't say whether you are going to feed your cows. It didn't say whether you are going to make cannabis oil for a sick relative. It didn't say any of that. So when it comes to legal things, and particularly with things like decriminalization, what is decriminalization actually? Because cannabis is not decriminalized in South Africa. I think we must realize that. Just now when I was away on our little arrests WhatsApp group, there were 2-3 arrests while I was away, big ones, of people who are now being dragged through the courts at our public expense. Yeah. So it's an incremental process. Decriminalization is not always what it seems, and it's been really nice chatting today.
Yeah, and I think just to close off, it has been nice chatting, but I think a very important point that just floats to the surface from what you've said is if you leave things like plant counting in, it just leaves room for this police abuse to get the arrest quotas up, to continue harvesting the low-hanging fruit, not actually solving real crime, not actually preventing harm, but actually just ruining the lives of everyday, otherwise law-abiding citizens.
Exactly, through your ignorance and your laziness.
And lack of empathy. That to me is
humanity.
That's the problem. Is that's the most tragic thing in this. Is where is the heart? Where is the love for your fellow human being in this lawmaking? And it doesn't seem to me that it's there.
And I mean, we can most certainly say from the bottom of our hearts that every single one of you people that has joined here today have got the biggest hearts ever, to be working in the field that you are, and making such a meaningful contribution to our society as largely young people in this group. We're really proud of you. When I was in Nigeria, my colleague Maria Goretti-Ane from Ghana said, well, tomorrow morning I've got to be presenting with SANPUD. So the fact that we, all over Africa, we're getting together, we're speaking about harm reduction, we're speaking about the different aspects of decriminalization. I think that we're arguing on the right side of history here, and I think that I just salute SANPUD once again for having this awesome series. And Charles is on the Zoom session, and he will certainly be on hand to answer any of your questions. And remember that he is actually our victim support member of our crew, of our Stop the Cops and Join the Q campaign. So he'll tell you more about that and answer any questions that you have. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the session. Thanks for inviting us. Bye.
Ciao for now.